The blood seeped through Stella Crawford's trembling fingers as she pressed harder against the gunshot wound in her brother's shoulder. The chaos of Dawson Creek's dusty Main Street faded around her as she focused solely on keeping him alive. It was 1878, a harsh summer in Wyoming Territory, and the law was as sparse as rain. The outlaw who'd shot Thomas lay dead nearby, his body already collecting flies in the afternoon heat, but Stella couldn't bring herself to care. "Miss, you need to let me help," a deep voice said from above her. She looked up to see a tall figure blocking the sun, his face shadowed beneath a well-worn Stetson. "I've seen wounds like this before." "And who are you to offer?" she demanded, her voice cracking with the strain of the past few minutes. "Name's Nathaniel Everett. I've got a wagon around the corner. Your brother needs proper care, and I know how to give it." His voice was steady, matter-of-fact, but not unkind. When he knelt beside her, she noticed his hands strong, capable, but gentler than she expected as he examined Thomas's wound. His face came into view then. Sun-weathered with a strong jawline, eyes the color of a summer sky, and a 3-day beard that couldn't hide the determined set of his mouth. "You'll get blood everywhere," he warned as she tried to lift her brother herself. She glared at him, her green eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Then it'll match the dirt you came from." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did a flicker of respect, perhaps. "Fair enough, miss, but I still aim to help." Together, they carried Thomas to Nathaniel's wagon. Stella kept pressure on the wound while the stranger drove them to the doctor's modest house at the edge of town. The motion jostled Thomas, who groaned in pain but remained unconscious. "How do I know you're not worse than what we're running from?" she asked, studying the cowboy's profile. "You don't," he replied honestly. "But your brother doesn't have the luxury of you being picky about help right now. Doctor." Wilson was waiting on his porch when they arrived, as if he'd expected trouble that day. "Another one, Nate," he sighed, already rolling up his sleeves. "Not my doing this time, Doc," Nathaniel answered, helping Stella carry Thomas inside. "Standoff in town. This young man was caught in the middle." For the next hour, Stella paced the doctor's front room while Nathaniel sat quietly in a chair by the window, his hat in his hands. She was aware of his eyes following her movement, but she was too worried about Thomas to care. "You're not from around here," he finally said, breaking the tense silence. "Neither is the bullet in my brother," she replied curtly, a smile ghosted across his lips. "You've got fire, miss. Crawford, Stella Crawford." She stopped pacing to face him. "And my brother is all I have left in this world, so if he dies because some trigger-happy fool thought he looked suspicious—" "Thomas was it," Nathaniel interrupted. "He's young and strong. Doc Wilson's patched up men with worse." "How do you know the doctor so well?" she asked, suspicion clouding her features. "I bring him patients now and then. Sometimes I'm the patient." He gestured to a scar along his forearm. "Occupational hazard." "And what occupation would that be, Mr. Everett, currently?" "I'm what you might call a problem solver for the territory marshal." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And what brings the Crawford siblings to our little paradise?" Stella hesitated. They had been running for so long that trust didn't come easily. "We're looking for land." "A fresh start." "That's what everyone says," Nathaniel replied, but there was no judgment in his tone. "But most folks looking for a fresh start aren't dodging bullets on their first day in town." Before she could respond, Dr. Wilson emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on a bloodied cloth. "He'll live," he announced. "The bullet passed clean through the meat of his shoulder. Lucky young man." Stella's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Thank you, doctor. What do I owe you?" "We can discuss that after your brother's on the mend," Dr. Wilson said kindly. "He needs rest now." You're welcome to stay with him in the recovery room." As the doctor retreated to clean his instruments, Stella turned to Nathaniel. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Everett. I apologize for my rudeness." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "No need, Miss Crawford. I reckon I'd be just as prickly if it were my brother bleeding out." He moved toward the door. "I'll check on you both tomorrow, if that's all right." Stella nodded, uncertain why the thought of seeing him again brought a small measure of comfort. After he left, she sat beside Thomas's bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest. They had come to Wyoming seeking anonymity and opportunity, hoping to escape the shadows of their past in Boston. Their parents had died within months of each other, father from consumption, mother from a broken heart, leaving them the family's mounting debts and a tarnished name. Thomas had suggested the West, where no one would know of their father's gambling or their mother's final decline. But their first day in Dawson Creek had already brought violence. It seemed trouble had followed them across the country. Stella dozed in the chair beside her brother's bed, waking at dawn to find Thomas stirring. His eyes fluttered open, confused at first, then focusing on her face. "Stella." "What happened?" She explained the events of the previous day, watching relief wash over him when she mentioned that the shooter was dead. "Did you get a look at him?" Thomas asked, his voice strained. "Just another drunk looking for trouble," she said. "Don't worry about that now. You need to rest." A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Wilson entered, followed by Nathaniel Everett, who carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Mrs. Halloway from the boarding house sent breakfast," Nathaniel explained, setting the basket on a small table. "And clean clothes for you, Miss Crawford." Stella became suddenly aware of her appearance, her dress stained with Thomas's blood, her hair falling from its pins, dark circles surely visible beneath her eyes. "That's very kind," she murmured. "Doctor." Wilson checked Thomas's wound, declared it healing nicely, and left to tend to other patients. Nathaniel lingered, his eyes meeting Thomas's wary gaze. "Thomas Crawford," her brother introduced himself, extending his good arm. "Nathaniel Everett," the cowboy replied, shaking his hand. "You caused quite a stir for your first day in town." Thomas's expression darkened. "Wasn't intentional, I assure you." "Rarely is," Nathaniel agreed. "Mind telling me what happened from your perspective? The marshal's asking questions." Stella tensed, but Thomas nodded. "I was inquiring about land at the surveyor's office. On my way out, this fellow bumped into me, started accusing me of cheating him at cards the night before." He shook his head. "I'd only just arrived on yesterday's stage, told him he had the wrong man, and then he didn't care for that answer, drew on me before I could explain further." Thomas winced, adjusting his position in the bed. "I've never even played cards, our father." He glanced at Stella, who gave a slight nod. "Our father lost everything to gambling. I swore I'd never touch a deck." Nathaniel's gaze shifted between the siblings, assessing their story. "The man who shot you was Ellis Jennings, known card shark and sore loser, been causing trouble up and down the territory." "Then it seems my brother was simply in the wrong place," Stella said, a challenge in her voice. "Appears so," Nathaniel agreed easily. "Marshal Briggs will want a statement, but I don't foresee any complications. Plenty of witnesses saw Jennings draw first." "Will there be a funeral?" Thomas asked unexpectedly. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "Most folks around here won't shed tears over Ellis Jennings. Marshall will see him buried, but I doubt anyone will attend." "I'd like to," Thomas said firmly. "Every man deserves someone to mark his passing, even a scoundrel." Stella frowned, but Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. "That's mighty Christian of you, considering he nearly sent you to your own grave." "Our father was buried without ceremony," Thomas explained quietly. "His debts and reputation saw to that. I wouldn't wish such an end on anyone." Something shifted in Nathaniel's expression, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "I'll let you know when it's happening, then." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Miss Crawford, when you're ready, Mrs. Halloway said there's room at her boarding house for you both. First week's paid up." "By whom?" she asked suspiciously. A smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Consider it Dawson Creek's welcome wagon making amends for your unfortunate introduction to our town. After he left, Stella helped Thomas eat some of the breakfast Mrs. Halloway had sent fresh biscuits, preserves, and slices of ham. As her brother drifted back to sleep, she changed into the simple but clean dress that had been provided and washed her face in the basin by the window. Outside, Dawson Creek was coming to life. Horses and wagons moved along the main street. Shopkeepers swept their boardwalks, and the blacksmith's hammer rang out a steady rhythm. It seemed so ordinary, so peaceful, as if yesterday's violence had been washed away with the night. A movement caught her eye: Nathaniel Everett, mounting his horse outside the marshal's office. He sat tall in the saddle, adjusting his hat against the morning sun before riding out of town. She wondered where he was going, what problems he might be solving for the marshal today. For the next 3 days, Thomas recovered under Dr. Wilson's care. Stella spent her time reading to her brother, helping the doctor with simple tasks to offset their bill, and familiarizing herself with Dawson Creek. The town was smaller than she'd expected: one main street with various businesses, a few side streets with modest homes, a small church, and scattered farms and ranches in the surrounding countryside. On the 4th day, as she returned from buying supplies at the general store, she found Nathaniel waiting outside the doctor's house. He stood when he saw her approach, removing his hat. "Miss Crawford," he greeted her, his voice warm, "your brother's asking for you." Alarm shot through her. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing like that," he assured her quickly. "Dr. Wilson says Thomas can be moved to the boarding house today. I've come to help with the transfer." Relief washed over her. "That's wonderful news." Inside, she found Thomas sitting up in bed, his arm in a sling, but color returned to his cheeks. Dr. Wilson was giving him final instructions on caring for the wound. "Stella," Thomas smiled at her entrance. "Mr. Everett says Mrs. Halloway has our rooms ready." "Indeed she does," Nathaniel confirmed. "And she's notorious for her home cooking. You'll be back to full strength in no time." With Nathaniel's help, they settled Thomas into a wagon cushioned with blankets for the short journey to the boarding house. Mrs. Halloway, a plump, cheerful widow in her 50s, welcomed them effusively, showing them to adjacent rooms on the ground floor. "I put you here so your brother won't have to manage stairs," she explained to Stella. "Bathrooms down the hall. Meals are at 7, noon, and 6, but I can bring trays if needed." After ensuring Thomas was comfortable in his new room, Stella found Nathaniel waiting on the porch. The late afternoon sun caught in his hair, revealing strands of gold among the brown. "Thank you again for your help," she said, joining him. "I'm beginning to feel I'll never stop being in your debt." "No debt between neighbors," he replied easily. "How do you find Dawson Creek so far, apart from the shooting, of course?" "It seems hopeful," she said after a moment's consideration. "People have been kind, despite our dramatic arrival." "Folks out here understand starting over," Nathaniel said, leaning against the porch railing. "Most everyone came from somewhere else, running to something or from something." She studied him, wondering which category he fell into. "And you, Mr. Everett, what brought you to Wyoming?" A shadow crossed his face. "The war, like many men, didn't have much to go back to in Virginia afterward. Came west looking for space to breathe." "The war between the states ended 13 years ago," she observed. "You couldn't have been more than a boy." 16 when I enlisted, 20 when it ended," he admitted. Old enough to know what I'd seen and done would follow me anywhere I went in the South. Stella nodded, understanding more than he might guess. Boston had felt equally suffocating after her father's disgrace and death, each familiar street a reminder of their fallen status, each former friend's turned back a fresh wound. "I hear there's land available north of town," she said, changing the subject. "Thomas and I hope to start a small horse breeding operation. He has a way with them." Nathaniel's expression brightened. "I know those parcels. Good grazing land, access to Crow Creek for water. I'd be happy to ride out with you when Thomas is stronger, show you what's available." "That's very kind, but we'd appreciate that," Thomas's voice interrupted from the doorway. He stood leaning against the frame, pale but determined. "You should be resting," Stella chided, moving to support him. "I've been resting for days," he protested mildly. "And I couldn't help overhearing. Mr. Everett's offer is generous and we'd be foolish to refuse local knowledge." Nathaniel nodded. "Marshal Briggs asked me to let you know that Jennings will be buried tomorrow at sundown, if you're still inclined to attend." "I am," Thomas confirmed. "Then I'll come by around 6, Nathaniel said, placing his hat back on his head. "Good evening to you both." As they watched him walk to his horse, Thomas murmured, "An interesting man." "He's been helpful," Stella agreed neutrally, though she couldn't deny a certain fascination with Nathaniel Everett. There was a depth to him that belied his straightforward manner, shadows and stories hinted at but not revealed. "More than helpful," Thomas observed with a sideways glance at his sister, "and not hard on the eyes from what I can tell." "Thomas," she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Don't be ridiculous. We barely know the man." "Which is why I'm attending a funeral with him tomorrow," her brother said with a mischievous smile. "Someone should get to know our Good Samaritan better." Stella helped him back to his room, ignoring his teasing. It was good to see Thomas in better spirits, even if his recovery would take weeks yet. They hadn't come west for romantic entanglements, they had come to rebuild their lives and their family's fortune through honest work. Still, as she unpacked their meager belongings in her room, she found herself wondering what it might be like to know Nathaniel Everett better. To discover what made him smile, what haunted his eyes when he spoke of the past, what had shaped him into the man who would stop to help strangers in distress. Such thoughts were a luxury she couldn't afford, she reminded herself firmly. Their future depended on focus and determination, not distraction, no matter how compelling that distraction might be. The following day passed quickly. Thomas continued to improve, even joining her and the other boarders for lunch at Mrs. Halloway's generous table. Stella ventured into town, visiting the land office to inquire about available parcels and their prices. The figures were daunting but not impossible if they were frugal and successful in their first year of breeding horses. They might manage the purchase. As promised, Nathaniel arrived at 6. He wore a clean black coat over his usual attire, his hat brushed free of dust. Thomas had likewise made an effort to look presentable, though his injured shoulder made dressing a challenge. "Not many attending," Nathaniel warned as they walked to the small cemetery behind the church. "Marshal, undertaker, preacher, and us. That's precisely why we should be there," Thomas said. "No man should be sent to meet his Maker without witnesses to mark the occasion." Stella linked her arm with her brother's, supporting him as they walked. Nathaniel kept pace beside them, his presence solid and reassuring. The funeral was brief, just as Nathaniel had predicted. Marshal Briggs nodded to them in acknowledgement, but seemed perplexed by their attendance. The preacher spoke generic words over the plain coffin before it was lowered into the ground. No flowers adorned the grave, no tears were shed as they turned to leave. Thomas paused, removing his hat. "May God have mercy on your soul, Ellis Jennings," he said softly. "And may you find peace that eluded you in life." On their walk back to the boarding house, Nathaniel's curious gaze kept finding Thomas. "You're an unusual man, Crawford," he finally said. "Most would celebrate their attacker's demise, not pray for his soul." Thomas shrugged his good shoulder. "Death equalizes us all in the end. Besides, a man like Jennings must have had a hard road to become what he was. That deserves some compassion." "Your brother has always been the better person between us," Stella added with a small smile. "And you, Miss Crawford?" Nathaniel asked. "Do you share his charitable view?" She considered the question honestly. "I'm grateful Thomas survived. Beyond that, I try not to speak ill of the dead, but I won't pretend to mourn a man who tried to kill my brother over a mistake." Nathaniel nodded, seeming to appreciate her frankness. "Fair enough." As they reached the boarding house, he hesitated. "I'm riding out to look at some horses tomorrow. There's a ranch about 10 miles north selling off stock. Thought Thomas might be interested, given your plans." "I would be," Thomas said eagerly. "But I'm not sure I'm up for the ride yet." "Perhaps another time," Nathaniel said, but his eyes shifted to Stella. "Unless your sister might want to come in your stead, get a feel for the local stock." Stella blinked in surprise. While she knew horses well enough from their father's former stables, she had always deferred to Thomas's greater expertise. "I'm not sure I'd be much use in evaluating horseflesh." "Sometimes a fresh eye sees what others miss," Nathaniel said. "And it would give you a chance to view some of the surrounding countryside, including those land parcels you mentioned." Thomas's eyes lit up. "You should go, Stella. I can manage for a day, and it would be helpful to have your impressions of the area." She hesitated, sensing her brother's not-so-subtle matchmaking. "If you're certain you'll be all right." "Mrs. Halloway will fuss over me like a mother hen," Thomas assured her with a grin. "I'm in good hands." "Then I'd be happy to accompany you, Mr. Everett," she conceded, ignoring the triumphant look Thomas failed to hide. "Nathaniel, please," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting. "If we're to spend a day riding together, formalities seem excessive." "Nathaniel," she repeated, finding she liked the feel of his name. "Until tomorrow, then." He tipped his hat to them both. "I'll be by at 7. Dress for riding, and Mrs. Halloway will pack us a lunch." As they watched him leave, Thomas nudged her gently. "Well now, that's interesting." "It's a practical arrangement," she insisted, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. "Nothing more." "If you say so," Thomas replied, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Just remember, Stella, we came west for a new start. That includes new possibilities." She helped him inside without responding, but his words lingered in her mind as she prepared for bed. New possibilities indeed. The very thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for riding. Stella dressed in her practical split skirt and riding boots, items that had raised eyebrows in Boston but seemed perfectly sensible for the Wyoming Territory. She braided her chestnut hair and pinned it up, donning a wide-brimmed hat to protect her fair skin from the sun. Nathaniel arrived exactly at 7, leading a second horse, a sturdy bay mare with intelligent eyes. "This is Penny," he introduced. "She belongs to the marshal's wife, who was kind enough to lend her for today. She's even-tempered but has spirit when needed." Stella approached the mare, letting her sniff her outstretched hand before gently stroking her nose. "Hello, Penny. We'll get along just fine, I think." Nathaniel watched her with approval. "You've handled horses before. Our father kept several before." She trailed off. "Before circumstances changed." He didn't press for details, just helped her mount and checked her stirrups. His hands were gentle but efficient, professional in their assistance. Once satisfied, he swung up onto his own mount, a tall black gelding with a white blaze. "This is Shadow," he said, patting the horse's neck. "Been with me for 6 years now. Best partner a man could ask for out here." They set off at an easy pace, heading north out of town. The terrain gradually changed from flat prairie to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. Wildflowers painted the landscape in splashes of yellow, purple, and white. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of sage and pine. "It's beautiful," Stella breathed, taking it all in. After the cramped, smoke-filled streets of Boston, the open spaces of Wyoming felt like freedom. "Gets under your skin," Nathaniel agreed. "First time I saw these hills, I knew I'd found home." "How long have you been in Dawson Creek?" 5 years now. Drifted through most of the Western territories after the war before settling here. She studied his profile, strong and sure against the backdrop of blue sky. "And working for the marshal, is that satisfying work?" A shadow crossed his face. "It has its moments. I have skills the territory needs: tracking, hunting. I can find people who don't want to be found." "That sounds dangerous," he shrugged. "Can be. But it's honest work and I sleep better than I did during the war." He glanced at her. "What about you? Horse breeding is ambitious for a woman on her own." "I'm not on my own," she reminded him. "Thomas and I are partners in this venture. He has the knowledge and I have the head for business." She hesitated, then added, "Our father left us with little but debts and a tarnished name. We're determined to build something honorable here." Nathaniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The West is good for that. Most folks don't care who your father was or what he did. They judge you on your own merits." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, cresting a hill that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. A creek wound through the center, bordered by cottonwoods and willows. Several cabins dotted the landscape, smoke rising from chimneys. "That's Crow Creek," Nathaniel pointed. "The land you were asking about starts just beyond that ridge to the east, about 100 acres available with water rights to the creek." Stella tried to envision it: a small cabin, pastures fenced for horses, perhaps a garden. A place that was truly theirs, built with honest work. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It needs work," he cautioned. "Land out here always does. Winters are harsh, summers can be dry. You'd need a solid cabin before the snow flies. Thomas is handy with tools. Between the two of us, we can manage." He studied her, a smile playing at his lips. "I believe you could at that. You strike me as a woman who accomplishes what she sets her mind to." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Necessity is a powerful motivator, Mr. Nathaniel." They continued riding, Nathaniel pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. He knew every hill and valley, every stream and stand of trees. His love for this land was evident in the way he described it, not just its beauty, but its challenges and dangers as well. By midday, they reached the ranch Nathaniel had mentioned. The owner, a grizzled man named Jenkins, welcomed them warmly, especially when Nathaniel explained their interest in horses. "Got a dozen head I'm looking to sell," Jenkins told them, leading the way to a corral where several horses grazed. "Getting too old to manage the breeding program properly. Focusing on cattle now, less temperamental." Stella examined each horse carefully, remembering her father's lessons and Thomas's practiced eye. She noted conformation, temperament, and movement, asking questions that clearly impressed both men. "Your brother breeds horses, you said?" Jenkins asked, eyebrows raised. "He plans to," she corrected. "We're looking to start a small operation north of town." Jenkins nodded approvingly. "You've got a good eye, miss. That bay mare you've been watching, she's the best of the lot. 4 years old, gentle disposition but spirited when worked. She'd make a fine foundation for a breeding program." The mare in question lifted her head at that moment, her intelligent eyes seeming to assess Stella in return. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "How much?" Stella asked, her voice steady despite the excitement building within her. Jenkins named a price that was fair but beyond their current means. She didn't hide her disappointment. "We won't be ready to purchase for a few months yet," she explained. "We need to secure land first, build shelter." Jenkins scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Tell you what, I respect folks with a plan and the knowledge to back it up. I'll hold her for you, say, 3 months. Put down a small deposit now, the rest when you're ready." Stella's heart leapt, but caution tempered her response. "That's very generous, Mr. Jenkins. May I discuss it with my brother before committing?" "Of course, miss. No rush. She ain't going nowhere if I say she ain't." As they prepared to leave, Jenkins pulled Nathaniel aside for a quiet word. Stella couldn't hear what was said, but Nathaniel's expression grew serious, then resigned. He nodded once before rejoining her on their ride back. They stopped by a small stream for their packed lunch. Nathaniel spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood, and they ate Mrs. Holloway's fried chicken and biscuits while watching the water flow over smooth stones. "What did Mr. Jenkins say to you before we left?" Stella asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Nathaniel took a moment to answer. "There's been trouble in the area. Cattle rustling, mostly, but a homesteader was killed last week about 20 miles east of here." Concern furrowed her brow. "Is that unusual?" "More so than it used to be. Territory's getting more settled every year, but lawlessness hasn't died out completely." He met her eyes directly. "I mention it not to frighten you, but because if you and Thomas settle in these parts, you should be aware." "I appreciate your candor," she said. "We're not naive about the challenges of frontier life." "No, I don't imagine you are," he agreed. "Still, 2 people alone on a homestead can be vulnerable. Might be wise to make friends with your neighbors, form alliances." "Is that an offer of alliance, Nathaniel Everett?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider its implications. His eyes held hers, serious but with a warmth that made her breath catch. "It is. I'm a good friend to have in these parts, Stella Crawford." The use of her first name, spoken in that deep voice, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cool breeze. "I believe that," she said softly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Nathaniel cleared his throat and began packing up their lunch things. "We should head back. Daylight's valuable out here." On their return journey, they detoured to view the land parcels Stella had inquired about. Seeing them in person confirmed her initial impression. This was the place where she and Thomas could build their new life. The terrain was varied enough to provide both grazing and shelter. The creek ensured water, and the location was close enough to town for commerce but far enough for privacy. "I'll speak with the land agent tomorrow," she decided aloud. "Make an offer on this parcel." Nathaniel nodded approvingly. "I think you've chosen well. This is good land." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they rode back into Dawson Creek. The town looked different to Stella now, more like a potential home than a temporary stop. People nodded greetings as they passed, and she found herself returning their gestures with genuine warmth. At the boarding house, Thomas was waiting on the porch, his color much improved after another day's rest. His eyes lit up with interest as they approached. "How was your expedition?" he called as Nathaniel helped Stella dismount. "Enlightening," she replied, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "Wait until you hear about the mare at Jenkins' ranch." For the next hour, they sat on the porch while Stella described everything she'd seen: the horses, the land, the surrounding countryside. Thomas listened intently, asking occasional questions but mostly absorbing her impressions. "And what do you think, Mr. Everett?" he finally asked. "Is my sister's enthusiasm justified?" Nathaniel, who had remained quietly attentive during Stella's recounting, nodded. "Your sister has good judgment both about horses and land. I believe you could build something worthwhile on that parcel." Thomas studied the man thoughtfully. "And you mentioned concerns about safety." Stella shot Nathaniel a surprised look. She hadn't mentioned that part yet. "Just being forthright," Nathaniel explained. "The territory's safer than it was 10 years ago, but isolated homesteads can still be targets." "It would be irresponsible not to mention it." Thomas nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty. It's something we'll need to consider in our planning." He glanced at his sister. "Perhaps we should discuss this further over dinner. Would you join us, Mr. Everett?" Nathaniel hesitated, then nodded. "I'd be honored, though I should see to the horses first." "Of course," Thomas agreed. "We'll expect you at 6 then." After Nathaniel had gone, leading both horses toward the livery stable, Thomas turned to Stella with a knowing smile. "So, sister mine, it seems your day was productive in more ways than one." "Don't start," she warned, though without heat. "Nathaniel has been nothing but helpful and professional." "Nathaniel, is it?" Thomas teased. "And the way he looks at you is purely professional, I'm sure." Heat rose to her cheeks. "You're imagining things." "I may have been shot, but my eyes work perfectly well," Thomas countered. "The man is interested, Stella, and unless I'm greatly mistaken, the feeling is mutual." She couldn't deny it, not to Thomas, who knew her better than anyone. "Even if that were true, we came here with a purpose. Romantic entanglements would only complicate matters." "Life is complicated," Thomas said simply. "And sometimes the best plans leave room for unexpected developments." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not saying marry the man tomorrow, just don't close your heart to possibilities." Stella sighed, leaning her head against her brother's good shoulder. "When did you become so wise?" "Probably around the time I took a bullet," he replied with a wry smile. "Nothing clarifies one's thinking quite like a brush with mortality." That evening, dinner was a pleasant affair. Mrs. Halloway had outdone herself with roast beef, potatoes, and apple pie for dessert. Nathaniel arrived precisely at 6, freshly bathed and wearing a clean shirt under his usual vest. His hair was still damp at the temples, curling slightly in a way that made him look younger, more approachable. The conversation flowed easily between topics: the land they hoped to purchase, the horses they'd need to start their breeding program, the challenges and rewards of life in the Wyoming Territory. Nathaniel shared stories of his early days in the region, including a particularly harrowing winter when he'd been caught in a blizzard and survived by sheltering in a cave with his horse. "That's the thing about the West," he concluded. "It will kill you if you let it, but it also teaches you how to live really live if you're willing to learn." After dinner, while Mrs. Halloway cleared the dishes, refusing all offers of help, Thomas excused himself, claiming fatigue. The knowing look he gave Stella as he left suggested his exhaustion was largely strategic. Left alone with Nathaniel in the boarding house's small sitting room, Stella felt a strange mixture of nervousness and comfort. She had known this man less than a week, yet something about his presence felt familiar, as if they had been circling each other for much longer. "Your brother is recovering well," Nathaniel observed, breaking the silence. "Yes, thank goodness," she agreed. "Though I worry he's pushing himself too quickly. He's always been impatient." "A common trait in younger brothers," Nathaniel said with a smile. "I had two myself." The past tense wasn't lost on her. Had, his expression sobered. "Jacob died at Chancellorsville. Samuel made it through the war only to succumb to typhoid in '67. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. He nodded, accepting her sympathy. "It was a long time ago, But it's why I understand Thomas's determination. Life feels precious when you've nearly lost it. Is that why you help strangers?" she asked. "Because of your brothers." Nathaniel considered the question seriously. "Maybe. Or maybe it's because when I needed help after the war, someone extended a hand to me, changed the course of my life." "Tell me," she encouraged, genuinely interested in understanding this complex man. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant with memory. "I was drifting west, half-starved and still carrying the war inside me like a wound that wouldn't heal. Stopped at a ranch in Colorado, looking for work. The owner, an old cavalryman named Harrison, took one look at me and saw a lost cause, but he hired me anyway." Nathaniel's voice grew softer, more reflective. "For 2 years I worked that ranch. Harrison never asked about the war, never demanded I speak of it. But he was there when the nightmares came, when the memories got too loud, taught me how to live in peace again." "He sounds like a remarkable man." "He was," Nathaniel agreed. "Died in his sleep 3 years ago, left me enough money to start fresh, which is how I ended up here." He refocused on her. "So yes, I help strangers because Harrison helped me when I was one. Seems only right to pass that forward." Stella felt something shift between them, a deepening of understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of shared values despite their different paths. "I think Harrison would be proud of the man you've become," she said quietly. Nathaniel held her gaze, something vulnerable and hopeful in his eyes. "That might be the kindest thing anyone said to me in a long while." Before she could respond, Mrs. Halloway bustled into the room with a tea tray, breaking the moment. But as they sipped their tea and the conversation turned to lighter topics, Stella felt the connection between them strengthening, a foundation being laid for something she hadn't expected to find in Dawson Creek. The next morning, Stella and Thomas visited the land office to make an offer on the parcel they'd discussed. The agent, Mr. Pullman, seemed surprised by their decisiveness, but pleased to have serious buyers. "It's good land," he acknowledged. "Bit remote for a lady, though," he added, glancing at Stella. "My sister and I will be partners in this venture," Thomas said firmly, "and she's more capable than most men I know." Mr. Pullman looked doubtful but accepted their deposit nonetheless. "The paperwork will take about a week to process. If all goes well, you could take possession by the end of the month." Excitement bubbled up inside Stella as they left the office. After years of uncertainty and struggle in Boston, they were finally taking concrete steps toward their new life. The land would be theirs, a place to build, to grow, to heal from the past. Their next stop was Jenkins Ranch, where Thomas inspected the bay mare Stella had admired. His assessment confirmed her judgment. The horse was indeed exceptional, with good bloodlines and temperament. "She'll be the cornerstone of our breeding program," Thomas declared, finalizing the deal with a handshake and a small deposit. "We'll return for her once we have shelter built." Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Thomas grew stronger daily, eventually joining Stella and Nathaniel on rides to their future property. Together, they planned the layout of their homestead, where the cabin would stand, the best locations for corrals and stables, how to maximize the natural features of the land. Nathaniel proved invaluable, sharing his knowledge of local conditions and building techniques. He introduced them to reliable suppliers for lumber and tools, negotiated fair prices on their behalf, and even recruited several men from town to help with the heavy construction work. "You don't have to do all this," Stella told him one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I know," he replied simply, "but I want to." Their eyes met, and the unspoken connection between them seemed to deepen. Stella found herself looking forward to these quiet moments, the way Nathaniel's voice softened when they were alone. how his hand sometimes brushed hers when passing tools or supplies, the shared glances that conveyed understanding without words. Thomas observed their growing closeness with barely concealed satisfaction, often finding reasons to leave them alone together. "You're about as subtle as a stampeding buffalo," Stella chided him after one particularly transparent excuse. "Subtlety is overrated," he replied cheerfully. "Besides, I like seeing you happy, Stella. It's been too long." She couldn't deny the truth of his words. The weight of their parents' deaths, the struggle to maintain appearances while selling off family heirlooms to pay debts, the whispers and pitying glances of former friends all had taken a toll on her spirit. Here in Dawson Creek, she felt herself coming back to life, like a plant finally receiving sunlight after too long in shadow, and much of that had to do with Nathaniel Everett. As June turned to July, construction began on their cabin. The foundation was laid, walls raised, a roof installed. Nathaniel was there almost daily, working alongside the hired men, his shirt dark with sweat as he helped place heavy logs or hammer nails. Stella found herself watching him more often than she should, admiring the strength and grace of his movements, the careful precision with which he approached each task. One afternoon, as they took a break from the heat, sharing water from a canteen in the shade of a pine tree, Nathaniel broached a subject that had been unspoken between them. "Jenkins mentioned you were planning to bring more horses from back east," he said. "Your family's stock." Stella tensed slightly. They hadn't shared the full story of their circumstances with anyone in Dawson Creek. "We had to sell most of our father's horses to settle his debts," she admitted. "But there are 2 mares and a stallion still with friends in Massachusetts. Good bloodlines. We're hoping to bring them out once we're established." Nathaniel nodded, seeming to understand what she wasn't saying. "Starting over isn't easy, leaving the past behind but carrying the good parts forward." "Exactly," she said, relieved by his perception. "Thomas and I want to honor what our father taught us about horses while creating something more stable than he managed." "Your father," Nathaniel hesitated. "Was he a good man who made mistakes, or—" "A good man with a fatal flaw," she supplied. "Gambling consumed him after our mother died. But before that—" she smiled at distant memories. "Before that, he was wonderful, patient, loving, full of stories and dreams. He taught us both to ride before we could walk, to respect horses as partners rather than possessions." "That legacy is worth preserving," Nathaniel said softly. She studied his face, the earnestness in his blue eyes. "What about your father? What legacy did he leave you?" A shadow crossed Nathaniel's features. "Duty, honor, unwavering loyalty to Virginia and the Confederacy." His jaw tightened. "He didn't live to see the end of the war, to question whether those principles were worth the cost." "And you've been carrying that question ever since," she guessed. He looked at her with something like wonder. "You see a lot, Stella Crawford." "Only when I'm looking closely," she replied, holding his gaze. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Thomas called from the cabin site, breaking the spell. They returned to work, but something had shifted, a deeper understanding, a shared vulnerability. That evening, as they rode back to town, Nathaniel seemed unusually pensive. When they reached the boarding house, he helped Stella dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Would you walk with me tomorrow evening?" he asked suddenly. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity piqued, she nodded. "I'd like that." The following day passed slowly, anticipation making Stella restless. By the time evening arrived, she had changed her dress twice and redone her hair, much to Thomas's amusement. "If you fuss any more, it'll be midnight before you leave," he teased. "I'm not fussing," she protested. though they both knew it was a lie. Nathaniel arrived promptly at 7, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed. He carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. Ready for a walk, they strolled through town as the day's heat began to fade, nodding to folks they passed. Nathaniel led her toward the western edge of Dawson Creek, where a small hill offered a view of the surrounding countryside. "This is one of my favorite spots," he said as they climbed. "Especially at this time of day." At the top, Stella caught her breath at the vista before them. The setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, the distant mountains purple against the horizon, the scattered homesteads and ranches like islands in a sea of grass. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "I come here sometimes to remember why I stayed," Nathaniel said quietly. "On days when the job gets dark or the memories get too loud." She turned to look at him, understanding the gift he was offering by sharing this place, this part of himself. "Thank you for bringing me here." He met her eyes, a vulnerability in his gaze that made her heart quicken. "I wanted to give you something," he said, extending the package he'd been carrying. "A welcome gift, I suppose." Curious, she unwrapped it to find a small leather-bound journal, the cover tooled with a simple design of mountains and stars. Opening it, she found blank pages waiting to be filled. "For your new beginning," he explained. "To record your journey, your dreams for the ranch, your life here." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "Nathaniel, it's perfect, thank you." "There's something else I wanted to say," he continued, his voice lower now. "These past weeks, getting to know you and Thomas, helping with your homestead, it's been the most content I've felt in a long time." Stella's heart hammered in her chest as he took a step closer. "I know you came here for a fresh start, not to get tangled up with the likes of me," he said. "And if friendship is all you want to offer, I'll respect that, but I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about more." The directness of his words both thrilled and frightened her. "I've thought about it too," she admitted softly. "More than I probably should have." Hope kindled in his eyes. "Stella," but whatever he meant to say was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. They both turned to see a rider galloping toward town, urgency in his posture. "Something's wrong," Nathaniel said, instantly alert. "We should head back." By the time they reached the main street, a small crowd had gathered outside the marshal's office. The rider, a ranch hand Stella recognized from a neighboring property, was gesticulating wildly as he spoke to Marshal Briggs. "What's happening?" Nathaniel asked a bystander. "Rustlers hit the Henderson place," the man replied grimly. "Took 20 head of cattle and shot Ben Henderson when he tried to stop them." Nathaniel's expression hardened. "Is Henderson?" "Alive, but barely. Doc's with him now." Marshal Briggs spotted them and motioned Nathaniel over. "Everett, I need you." "These are the same gang that killed Williams last month." Description matches. "They're heading north, probably aiming for the Montana border." Nathaniel nodded, his posture shifting, becoming more alert, more dangerous. "How many?" "At least 5, maybe more. I'm gathering a posse." "We ride in 20 minutes." Stella watched the exchange with growing concern. Nathaniel turned back to her, conflict evident in his eyes. "You have to go," she said, understanding before he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This isn't how I wanted tonight to end." "Be careful," she urged, fighting the fear that suddenly gripped her. She had seen too much loss already. The thought of Nathaniel riding into danger made her stomach knot. "I will," he promised. "We'll finish our conversation when I return." He hesitated, then, with a glance at the busy street around them, took her hand and raised it briefly to his lips, a gesture both old-fashioned and startlingly intimate. Then he was gone, striding toward the livery to prepare Shadow for the journey. Stella stood watching until he disappeared from view, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. Only then did she realize she was still clutching the journal he had given her, its leather warm against her palm like a promise. Thomas was waiting on the boarding house porch when she returned, his expression concerned. "I heard about Henderson," he said as she joined him, "and that Nathaniel's riding with the posse." She nodded, unable to hide her worry. "They think it's the same men who killed that homesteader last month." Thomas squeezed her hand. "He'll be careful. From what I've seen, Nathaniel Everett knows how to handle himself in dangerous situations." "I know," she said, though the reassurance did little to calm her fears. "But this isn't like tracking a lone fugitive. These men have already killed once." "And that's precisely why men like Nathaniel are needed to stop them," Thomas reminded her gently. "It's who he is, Stella." She knew her brother was right. Nathaniel's sense of justice, his willingness to stand between innocent people and those who would harm them, these were qualities she admired in him. But they were also qualities that put him in danger. For the next 3 days, Stella went through the motions of normal life. She and Thomas continued work on their homestead, overseeing the installation of windows and a proper floor in the cabin. She visited Jenkins' ranch to check on their mare, now officially named Promise. She helped Mrs. Halloway with chores around the boarding house. But her thoughts constantly returned to Nathaniel, wondering where he was, if he was safe, when he might return. Each time a rider came into town, she found herself looking up hopefully, only to be disappointed. On the 4th day, as she and Thomas were returning from their property, they saw a group of riders approaching from the north. Stella's heart leapt when she recognized Shadow's distinctive gait among them. The posse looked weary but triumphant. Several horses carried bodies draped over their saddles, the rustlers, Stella presumed. Nathaniel rode near the front, his face dusty and unshaven, a bandage visible on his left arm. He saw her watching and broke away from the group, guiding Shadow toward her. Thomas tactfully continued on to the boarding house, leaving them alone. "You're hurt," Stella said as he dismounted, noting the bloodstain on the bandage. "Just a graze," he assured her. "Looks worse than it is." Relief and concern warred within her. "Did you find them all?" He nodded, leaning against Shadow's side, clearly exhausted. 4 dead, 2 captured. They'll stand trial for Henderson's shooting and William's murder." His eyes met hers. "Ben Henderson will recover. That's something, at least." Without thinking, Stella stepped forward and touched his face, brushing away dust from his cheek. "I'm glad you're back safely." Nathaniel caught her hand, holding it against his face for a moment. "So am I," he said softly, "especially now." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. There, in the middle of Dawson Creek's main street, with people bustling around them and the sun beating down, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too strong to ignore any longer. "You need rest," she said, reluctantly stepping back. "And that arm should be checked by the doctor." "Yes, madam," he agreed with a tired smile. "But tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like to finish our conversation." "I'd like that too," she said, her heart light despite the worry of the past days. She watched him lead Shadow toward the livery, his tall figure moving with the same quiet confidence she'd come to admire, if a bit more wearily now. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she knew with sudden clarity that Nathaniel Everett had become essential to her happiness. That night, unable to sleep, Stella opened the journal he had given her and began to write. She poured out her fears of the past days, her relief at his return, her confusion about what the future might hold. The blank pages received her thoughts without judgment, a safe place to explore feelings she was only beginning to understand. The next day dawned bright and clear. Thomas announced his intention to spend the day at their property, supervising the completion of the roof. "Don't worry about joining me," he said with studied casualness. "I'm sure you have other matters to attend to in town." "Subtle as always, brother," she remarked dryly, though she was grateful for his understanding. Nathaniel arrived mid-morning, looking more rested but still bearing the bandage on his arm. "Walk with me," he asked simply. They strolled to the same hill where they'd been interrupted days before, the view just as beautiful in morning light as it had been at sunset. For a while they stood in comfortable silence, sharing the vista and the moment. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Nathaniel finally said. "About what I wanted to say before we were interrupted." Stella turned to face him, heart hammering. "And what was that?" He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I've lived a solitary life since the war. Easier that way, no attachments, no one to worry about or disappoint, but these past weeks with you." He looked directly into her eyes. "You make me want more than solitude, Stella. You make me want a future I'd stopped believing was possible." The raw honesty in his voice touched something deep within her. "I came west to start over," she said softly. "To build something stable and honorable with Thomas. I wasn't looking for—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Love," he supplied gently. The word hung between them, both frightening and exhilarating in its simplicity. "Yes," she admitted. "And yet here we are." Nathaniel took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I don't expect answers today. I know your focus is on establishing your homestead, on building that new life with Thomas. I just wanted you to know where I stand, that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." The space between them seemed charged with possibility. Stella thought of Thomas's words that the best plans leave room for unexpected developments. She thought of her parents, of the love they had shared before grief and gambling tore their family apart. She thought of the lonely years in Boston after their deaths, and how different Dawson Creek felt with Nathaniel in it. "I'm not very good at waiting," she confessed, a smile tugging at her lips. "It's a family failing." Hope kindled in his eyes. "What are you saying, Stella?" Instead of answering with words, she closed the distance between them, raising her face to his. Nathaniel hesitated only a moment before lowering his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepening with shared hunger. His hands came up to frame her face, calloused thumbs stroking her cheeks with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Stella's arms wound around his waist, feeling the solid strength of him, the realness of this moment they had been moving toward since that first day on Dawson Creek's dusty street. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you glared at me over your brother's bleeding body," he confessed. She laughed softly. "Even when I said your help would match the dirt you came from." "Especially then," he grinned. "A woman with that kind of fire is worth getting to know better." The month that followed was the happiest of Stella's life. Work continued on their homestead, with Nathaniel there almost daily, helping to finish the cabin and build corrals for the horses. Thomas recovered fully from his wound, throwing himself into preparations for their breeding operation with characteristic enthusiasm. And through it all, Stella and Nathaniel's relationship deepened. They shared stories of their pasts, both the joyful memories and the painful ones. He told her more about the war, about the nightmares that still occasionally haunted him. She confided the humiliation of watching her family's possessions sold at auction, of former friends crossing the street to avoid speaking to poor Stella Crawford. "You're not poor Stella anymore," Nathaniel told her one evening as they sat on their cabin's newly completed porch, watching twilight settle over what would soon be their home. "You're building something here that's yours on your own terms." "We are," she corrected, including Thomas in the statement. "And you've been part of it from the beginning." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I've been thinking about that, actually. Something in his tone made her heart skip. Oh. This land you and Thomas have bought, it's good land, but it's a lot for two people to manage, even as capable as you both are. We'll hire help once we're established, she said, though the logistics had been concerning her as well. Or, Nathaniel said carefully, you could consider a partner. Someone with experience in the territory, contacts in the right places, and a vested interest in seeing you succeed. Stella turned to face him fully. Are you proposing a business arrangement, Mr. Everett? A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Among other arrangements, Miss Crawford, if you're amenable. Her breath caught as his meaning became clear. That's a significant commitment you're suggesting. I know, he said, his expression growing serious, and I wouldn't suggest it lightly. But these past weeks have shown me what's possible with this land with you. He squeezed her hand. I love you, Stella. I want to build a life with you here if you'll have me. Tears pricked at her eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. I love you too, she whispered. And yes, I'll have you as a partner in all things. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Nathaniel pulled her into his arms, sealing their agreement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. That night, riding back to town together, they discussed how to broach the subject with Thomas. He's been trying to push us together from the start, Stella pointed out. I doubt he'll be surprised. Still, it's his future too, Nathaniel said. This was supposed to be your fresh start together. I don't want him to feel I'm intruding. His consideration for her brother only made Stella love him more. Thomas wants me to be happy, and he respects you enormously, but you're right, we'll talk to him together. As it happened, Thomas was waiting on the boarding house porch when they arrived, a letter in his hand and excitement on his face. Perfect timing, he called as they approached. I've had word from Boston. Our horses will be on the train to Cheyenne next week. We can bring them home. That's wonderful news, Stella exclaimed, embracing her brother. With promise from Jenkins Ranch, that will give us a solid foundation for breeding. Thomas nodded, then looked between them with a knowing smile. And there's something else, isn't there? You both have that look. Stella glanced at Nathaniel, who nodded encouragingly. We have a proposition for you, brother, she began, about the future of Crawford horse breeding. Ah, Thomas said, his smile widening. I was wondering when you two would get around to formalizing matters. You're not surprised, Nathaniel observed. Thomas laughed. Mr. Everett, I've been watching my sister fall in love with you since the day you helped us, and I've been watching you fall just as hard for her. He extended his hand. I can think of no one better to join our venture or our family. Relief washed over Stella as the two men shook hands. Thomas had been her constant, her support through the darkest days after their parents' deaths. His blessing meant everything. There is one condition, Thomas added, his expression turning serious. You have to promise to make her happy, Nathaniel. She deserves nothing less. On that, we are in complete agreement, Nathaniel replied solemnly, and I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of her. The following week brought another milestone, the completion of their cabin and the first corrals on their new property. Together, the three of them moved their belongings from the boarding house to the homestead. The cabin was modest but solid, with 2 bedrooms, a common area, and a kitchen that Stella immediately began to make her own. Mrs. Halloway had gifted them with curtains for the windows and a quilt for Stella's bed. Dr. Wilson contributed a small case of medicines for both human and equine ailments. Even Marshal Briggs stopped by with a housewarming present, a fine shotgun for protection and hunting. The day after they settled in, they made the journey to Cheyenne to collect their horses from Boston. The reunion was emotional for Stella and Thomas. These animals represented the last tangible connection to their former life. to the father they had loved despite his flaws. Nathaniel watched with understanding as Stella pressed her face against the neck of her father's prize stallion, Triumph, whispering words of greeting and reassurance. The horse remembered her, nickering softly and butting his head against her shoulder. "He's magnificent," Nathaniel said when she finally stepped back. "Your father had a good eye." "The best," she agreed, wiping tears from her cheeks. "He would be so pleased to know Triumph will sire a new generation here." With all 4 horses Triumph, the 2 mares from Boston and Promise from Jenkins Ranch safely installed in their new home, the Crawford Everett horse breeding enterprise was officially established. They celebrated that night with a simple meal in their cabin, the windows open to the summer breeze, the sounds of their horses in the nearby corral a sweet accompaniment. "To new beginnings," Thomas proposed, raising his glass. "And to family," Nathaniel added, his eyes meeting Stella's with a warmth that still made her breath catch. "To love," she completed softly, knowing they had found all 3 in this place with each other. 2 weeks later, on a perfect August morning, Stella Crawford and Nathaniel Everett were married in Dawson Creek's small church. Thomas stood proudly as his sister's only attendant. Mrs. Halloway cried openly throughout the ceremony, while Dr. Wilson, Marshall Briggs, and other townspeople who had become friends filled the pews. Stella wore a new dress of pale blue silk, Nathaniel's gift, ordered specially from Cheyenne. Her hair was adorned with wildflowers gathered that morning from the hills around their homestead. When she walked down the aisle to where Nathaniel waited, his face alight with love and wonder, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. The vows they exchanged were simple but profound, promises of fidelity, partnership, and enduring love. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel's kiss was both tender and passionate, a perfect balance of restraint and desire that left her flushed and breathless. The celebration afterward was held at their homestead, with tables set up under the cottonwoods by the creek. Mrs. Halloway had outdone herself with the wedding feast, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing as the afternoon stretched into evening. Lanterns were lit as darkness fell, casting a golden glow over the gathering. "Happy, Mrs. Everett," Nathaniel murmured as they danced, his arms strong around her waist. "Deliriously," she confirmed, still marveling at her new name, her new life. "And you, husband?" His smile was answer enough, but he added, "More than I ever thought possible." Later, after the guests had departed, and Thomas tactfully made himself scarce with plans to stay in town for a few days, Nathaniel carried Stella across the threshold of their cabin. The nerves she had expected to feel were overshadowed by anticipation and trust. This was Nathaniel, who had proven his love in 1,000 ways, large and small. Their wedding night was a revelation, a communion of bodies and hearts that left them both trembling with the power of what they had found together. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight spilled through the curtains, Stella knew with absolute certainty that all the hardship, all the loss and uncertainty of the past had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. "What are you thinking?" Nathaniel asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the most unexpected turns in life lead to the greatest happiness," she replied, raising herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "When Thomas was shot that day, I was so frightened, so angry at the world for putting yet another obstacle in our path. I never imagined it would lead to this to you." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "I knew, I think. Not consciously, but something shifted when I saw you there, fierce as a lioness protecting her cub. When you glared at me and said my help would match the dirt I came from," he smiled at the memory. "I thought, This woman is going to matter to me." She traced the line of his jaw, still marveling that she was allowed such intimacy now. "And do I matter to you more than my next breath?" he vowed, pulling her down for a kiss that left no doubt of his sincerity. Over the following year, their dreams took solid shape. The horse breeding operation flourished, with Triumph's first foals showing exceptional promise. Thomas built his own cabin on the property, giving the newlyweds privacy while remaining an integral part of their shared enterprise. Together, the three of them established a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far away as Denver and Salt Lake City. Nathaniel continued to occasionally assist Marshall Briggs with particularly difficult cases, but his primary focus became the homestead and their growing business. He proved to have a natural talent for horse training, his patience and gentle firmness earning the trust of even the most spirited animals. In the spring of 1880, as wildflowers once again carpeted the hills around their home, Stella shared news that brought tears of joy to Nathaniel's eyes. They were expecting a child. The baby, a girl they named Sarah Elizabeth after both their mothers, was born that November, with Thomas pacing anxiously outside while Dr. Wilson attended the delivery. "She's perfect," Nathaniel whispered when he first held his daughter, her tiny hand curling around his finger with surprising strength. Just like her mother. Stella, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband with their child and felt her heart expand with a love she hadn't known was possible. This was what they had built together, not just a successful business or a comfortable home, but a family bound by choice and love rather than obligation. As Sarah grew, so did their enterprise. By her third birthday, Crawford Everett horses were sought after throughout the territory and beyond. Thomas had courted and married Jenny Miller, the schoolteacher from Dawson Creek, and they were expecting their first child. The original cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a proper kitchen for Stella and a study where Nathaniel kept meticulous records of their breeding program. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in fiery hues, Sarah asleep on her father's lap, Stella was struck by how far they had come from that bloody day on Dawson Creek's Main Street. "What's that smile for?" Nathaniel asked, noticing her expression. "I was just thinking about beginnings," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "How the worst days can sometimes lead to the best life." He kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her. "I thank God every day for whatever twist of fate put me on that street when Thomas was shot." "Even though I was rude to you," she teased. "Especially because of that," he chuckled. "Your fire was the first thing I loved about you, Stella Everett." She turned her face up to his, still finding wonder in the depth of feeling reflected in his eyes. "And I loved your steadiness, your quiet strength. You were like solid ground when everything else was shifting beneath my feet. We balance each other," he observed, stroking Sarah's dark curls as she slept. "Fire and earth. The perfect combination for growing things," Stella agreed, placing her hand over his. "Like this life we've built together." As darkness settled over their homestead, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Stella Crawford Everett knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the love of the man beside her and the family they had created. From the ashes of loss and the dirt of new beginnings, they had cultivated something beautiful and enduring, a legacy of love that would outlast them both. And it had all started with blood on a dusty street, and words spoken in fear and defiance that had somehow led to the greatest love she would ever know.